Hello and welcome to the Business Standard Morning Show. I'm Meenu Sandhu. Let's take a look at the stories for the day. Amid a steep rise in incidents of cyber frauds, the Reserve Bank of India has come up with a new rule to make online transactions more secure. It has asked all the merchants and payment gateways to remove customer data on debit and credit cards saved with them. The central bank has asked them to use encrypted tokens for all transactions starting from January 1 next year. Now, after the auto debit rule, this new regulation will only add to the woes of consumers and merchants. Here's a look at how this rule will impact you and the digital commerce sector as a whole.
Under the new RBI guidelines, only card issuers and card networks will be able to store card details of customers. All the merchants and payment banks will now have to remove these details from the system, which the central bank said have been compromised on several instances. Beginning January 1, the merchants will have to switch over to a new way of transaction called tokenization. It ensures that a transaction can take place without disclosing the cardholder's account information to either the merchant or any of the intermediaries. Tokenization is the replacement of an actual or clear card number with an alternative code called the token. This token also consists of 16 digits, just like the typical credit card number. Note that UPI already uses tokenization to secure transactions. Once created, the tokenized card details will be used in place of an actual card number for online purchases initiated by the cardholder. Customers do not have to pay for the service of tokenizing their cards. Now, the banks, merchants, and other stakeholders are racing against time to comply with the new card data storage norms of the RBI. NASSCOM and the Alliance of Digital India Foundation or ADIF are reportedly seeking a phased implementation of the tokenization mandate along with the minimum 2-year timeframe for the transition. Speaking to a financial daily, NASSCOM expressed its objection to RBI's short timeline for tokenization, saying that this would be a double whammy for the digital commerce sector, which has already been hit by the central bank's recurring payments mandate and is still trying to emerge from it. Small players, which were affected in particular, stand to lose out the most. The RBI's new rules on recurring payments came into effect from October. Under the new rules, if you make use of recurring transactions using debit cards, credit cards, and unified payments interface, then you must undertake a one-time additional factor authentication for smooth auto debit transactions. Failing this, payments such as those to streaming services like Netflix and music apps like Spotify will get cancelled. Also, if the recurring payment is above 5,000 rupees, then the cardholder must approve it with OTP-based authentication every time it is due for payment. ADIF, a think tank for India's digital startups, gave a statement saying that the tokenization mandate required an ecosystem-wide change in tech systems and workflows. It said this policy change will affect 3 major players: banks, intermediary payment systems, and merchants. In the scenario that banks are lax on preparedness, the brunt of that will be borne by merchants in the form of loss of revenue. Business Standard spoke to Sijo Kuruvilla George, Executive Director of ADIF, to understand the impact of the new rules on merchants.
Even at a very simple level where users have to reauthorize once more that I want to renew my mandate, right? That itself, as a rule of thumb, will result in a 20 to 30% loss of revenue, depending on the kind of service you are in, right? If you're a content business, something like a newspaper sort of business, your losses could be much more higher, right? It's not a compelling service. People are going to quickly trying to figure out to do that. So all this combined, there is every indication that if the transition doesn't happen very smoothly, even if the technical transition transition happens very smoothly, we are looking at a very, very minimal, even at a rule of thumb of 10-20% revenue share, even at a reauthorization standpoint. But should the underlying technology also not work well, the multiplier impact of that, which has an impact on merchants, could be extremely high. What we're advocating from a timeline is not just the absolute timeline or a deadline. We're saying the approach could be shifted to a transition sort of a regime, right? Where over a period of, let's say, 1 to 2 years, we are completely switching over, and it will be a phase-wise implementation, right? So companies also can opt in everything in terms of educating users, create chinks in the armor, and after a certain threshold, let's say 60 or 70% people have transitioned, then you can say that, hey, there's a 6-month window to transition rest of your customers as well, and we will only adopt this going forward, right? And in between, people have not caught up that particular measure, we can actually have a system of, let's say, penalties or levies or whatever it may be.
Clearly, companies and industry might have good reasons to fear large-scale disruption. They want more time to comply with the tokenization mandate. After the businesses, let us see what consumers like us will be affected from this new regime. Consumers are now being asked if they want their card details in the secured or tokenized format. While it is not mandatory for customers to get their cards tokenized, they can choose to do so to enjoy a seamless one-click checkout process in the future. If they don't, they will have to manually type their 16-digit card number, CVV, and expiry date each time they want to make a purchase online. The central bank has put the new regime in place to ensure that consumers' money is safe. But most important experts believe that the central bank should also ensure that the transition is smooth. As far as businesses are concerned, time alone will tell whether they are justified in their fears that this mandate could push hundreds of small and medium merchants and payment operators out of business.
From online transaction hassles, let's now move to what is happening in the world of markets as the year 2021 draws to a close. Foreign portfolio investors or FPIs have been taking some money off the table since the indices hit new all-time highs and valuations surpassed historically high levels. So far in December, FPIs have sold equities worth over Rs 33,000 crore, and this trend is expected to continue for the remaining part of 2021. So when can investors get a respite from FPI selling? Watch this report to find out.
The bull run in the Indian equities has been toppled by persistent selling by foreign investors. Since October, FPI counterparts have sold equities worth 33,805 crore rupees. Of this, 14,300 crore rupees, or 42%, was offloaded in December alone. Analysts believe FPI started taking some money off the table ever since indices hit new all-time highs and valuation discomfort emerged. The benchmark S&P BSE Sensex hit its all-time high on October 19. This, coupled with concerns that the interest regime could turn less benevolent, triggered selling as emergency markets affected badly when interest rates go up. And since India has been a large recipient of FPI flows, there is heightened selling. The weakening of the rupee due to rise in the current account deficit is also tilted against India. That apart, some of the sale in secondary markets was also because of investment options in the primary markets. For example, in December so far, FPIs are net buyers in the primary market to the tune of 11,782 crore rupees. Let's go to Vaibhav Sanghvi, co-CEO of Avendus Capital, to understand what's driving FPIs away from EMIs, including India.
See, I think, Puneet, it is in continuation of what Fed's outcome was in terms of their meeting. They have been hawkish for a while, and precisely the reason when they have kind of changed the tone earlier towards faster tapering and guiding for interest rates hike in the second half of 2022 is where the street is taking cognizance and probably realigning their portfolios from the risk assets, which is why we have seen some amount of negative flows which have been there. It is also aided by the uncertainty on Omicron as well. And latest, but not the, last but not the least, is basically the infrastructure bill, which has been kind of being debated much upon in US as well. So all in all, I think there is some money which is being taken off before the year.
That said, while most analysts expect the trend to remain a key overhang on the domestic equities in the short term, there are some who are optimistic on FPI activity in 2022. VK Vijay Kumar, Chief Investment Strategist at Geojit Financial Services, for instance, sees the current FPI activity as profit booking and not selling. He further adds, FPIs have been sitting on big profits on bank stocks, which they accumulated during 2015-2020. So profit booking makes sense. While FIIs continued selling in banks between December 1 and 15, they bought insurance stocks worth nearly 5,000 crore rupees and oil and gas stock worth 2,686 crore rupees during this period. The takeaway from this data is that FIIs are not indiscriminately selling India and will turn buyers when they see value. Data compiled by IIFL Securities shows that FPI sold equities worth $2.1 billion in the sector in November, which was the highest COVID-19 induced sell-off culminated. In the last 6 months, FPI outflows from the sector have aggregated to $3.4 billion. At the end of November, FPI's allocation in banks and financials was at the lowest level since September 2020. On the contrary, FPI allocation in power and realty was at highest level since February 2018 and Jan 2018. Separately, Abhijit Bhave, Chief Executive Officer at Fisdom Private Wealth II, remains bullish on FPI flows in the next year. The recent FII outflows can be viewed as a year-end phenomena and a possible knee-jerk reaction to recent events. FIIs are expected to return in 2022 as the structural bull run in Indian equities is likely to continue and the Indian economy cruises along an expected rate of over 9% with a stable and strong central government at the helm. For now, Indian equities remain at the mercy of FPIs and investors' assessment of the severity of the Omicron variant of coronavirus. On Wednesday, market participants will track the sustenance of the recovery seen yesterday. Besides, IPO of CMS Infosystems and the listing of Metro Brands will be eyed.
Not just markets, this year was also great for startups. At least 42 of them went on to attain the unicorn status. More startups entered this coveted club in 2021 than all the previous years combined. India is now home to about 80 unicorn startups. Without a doubt, this has been the most successful year for India's startup ecosystem. Let's look back at the evolution of unicorns this year and why India saw this level of unicorn frenzy.
About a week ago, an Indian startup founder quipped on Twitter that the definition of a unicorn as used in the venture capital industry should now change to $1 billion of funding raised. The term currently refers to a startup that reaches a valuation of $1 billion. He was commenting on the flurry of unicorns that have been created globally. The term was originally coined by US venture capitalist Eileen Lee in 2013, when there were just 39 startups globally that fit the definition, which has not changed since then. Achieving the milestone was once considered elusive, but India's example shows the term unicorn no longer holds the same weight as before. In a blockbuster year for startup funding, India saw the creation of 42 unicorns, a 3 times jump from 11 new unicorns in 2020 and 9 in the previous year. Starting with Digit Insurance on January 15 to Pristine Care on December 8, the unicorns came from a range of sectors. The 42 companies are collectively valued at more than $90 billion. The year also saw the fastest and the slowest unicorns. Mensa Brands, which acquires direct-to-consumer, fashion, home and personal care labels, became a unicorn in just 6 months. While in March, Chennai-based NBFC 5-Star Business Finance achieved this status after 37 years in existence. Fintech was arguably the biggest contributor to the unicorn universe this year. Cred, Grow, Zeta, BharatPay, MobiKwik, Upstock, and Slice were the 7 fintech additions. While edtech industry leader Byju's became a decacorn this year with $18 billion valuation, 3 of its rivals joined the unicorn club this year: Eruditus, Upgrad, and Vedantu. Indian edtech startups have gained greater investor confidence after China mandated all online education companies to register as non-profits. Despite regulatory uncertainty, India also saw 2 crypto unicorns in CoinDCX and CoinSwitch Kuber. The B2B commerce space too saw funding frenzy with Inframarket, Moglix, Off Business, and Zetwork turning unicorns. The funding activity this year was led by Sequoia Capital, Tiger Global, SoftBank Group, and Axel. It all brings us to an important question: what triggered the unicorn rush in 2021? Ritesh Banglani, partner at Stellaris Venture Partners, gives us an answer.
In my view, valuation is a consequence, not a cause of an optimism about a particular industry. And right now, global investors are extremely optimistic about the tech industry in India. This is driven by a variety of factors. I would say chief amongst them is the rapid growth in internet penetration in the country. We are now at 41% penetration, and at no time and in no other country have we seen such sharp growth in internet penetration. And still there is a lot of headroom to grow because only 41% of the country is covered. Similarly, if you think of technologies like UPI, we are now processing $1.3 trillion worth of transactions over UPI every year. This is the fastest growth of any payment instrument in the world ever in history. Consumer spending in India has been extremely resilient. We have bounced back on that metric very sharply after the initial shock of the pandemic. All of this reminds investors of what they saw in China and other emerging economies. And so they are seeing this as a precursor to massive value creation by internet and software companies in India. Of course, valuation only signals investor expectations for the future and gives access to cheaper capital to these companies. In the end, it is up to the tech companies to deliver on those expectations so that the investors can actually realize the returns that they are hoping for.
As it rained unicorns, it has also been the year of startup IPOs. The listing of Zomato, Nykaa, Policybazaar, and Paytm were a big boost to the startup ecosystem, as it showed that India can give an exit path to investors. China's crackdown on tech companies has helped India bolster its attractiveness as an emerging market alternative. Early stage venture capital fund 314 Capital predicts that India will be home to more than 150 unicorns by 2025. The unprecedented funding boom is expected to spill over to the next year as well, helped by India's rapid adoption of technology and innovative offerings from startups. With another 9 days left in the year, it is likely that we may see a few more surprise announcements.
Unlike India's evolving unicorns, the giant Siberian rhino, which may have been the origin of the unicorn myth, could not adapt to the changing climate and went extinct about 39,000 years ago. Now, as countries realize the harmful effects of global warming, they are moving towards net zero emissions. Recently, India also pledged to cut its emissions to net zero by 2070 at a global summit on climate change in Glasgow. Here's an explainer for you on net zero emissions and what it may take for India and the world to achieve this target.
At the climate change conference earlier this year, the US and Europe pledged to achieve the net zero target by 2050, while China promised to do it by 2060. India promised to achieve this target by 2070. Net zero, also called carbon neutrality, is when the amount of greenhouse gases produced is not more than the amount that is removed from the atmosphere. This absorption of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere happens through carbon sinks, such as an increased forest cover. Removal of these dangerous gases from the atmosphere is done through advanced technologies, such as carbon capture and storage. Several stringent measures will have to be taken to achieve this net zero target. For this, all human-caused emissions have to be brought down drastically. It will need long-term measures like replacing fossil fuels with cleaner energy. For example, internal combustion engine vehicles will have to be replaced with electric vehicles. India's coal-powered electricity grid should be balanced with renewable energy sources such as hydropower, solar, and green hydrogen. The remaining greenhouse gas emissions need to be removed by using carbon removal technologies. Now, carbon can be absorbed or removed either by increasing the forest cover or using direct air capture and storage technology. Developing countries such as India have argued that the major burden of reducing emissions should fall on Western countries such as the US, who've been the major beneficiaries of the Industrial Revolution and are hence the most responsible for climate change. India has also argued that developed countries should help developing nations with the funds needed to shift to cleaner fuels and energy technologies. There are a lot of dimensions to achieving the net zero emissions target. Changes across our policies, technologies, and behaviors are needed for the world to become carbon neutral. To contain global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius, energy efficiency and fuel switching measures are critical for the transportation sector. Plus, everything from reducing food loss and waste, increasing public transport, eating more plants and less meat, and halting deforestation will be significant contributors for the world to become carbon neutral. India has committed to reducing its greenhouse gas emissions by 33 to 35% by 2030, a target it says it is well on track to achieving. Recently, the Energy and Resources Institute did a study for Shell that focused on technology solutions for India to move to net zero in the energy sector by 2050. According to the study, India needs to increase the share of electricity in its energy mix from 18% today to 45% in 2050. It also needs to increase the share of renewable sources of energy for its electricity generation to 90% by 2050. According to the study, India's current carbon emissions are about 2.5 gigatons, which is estimated to touch 6 gigatons by 2050 under a business as usual scenario. Even after following its planned path for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, 1.3 gigatons of carbon emissions would still be left. To remove this and achieve the net zero target, India will have to undertake forestation of 30 to 40 million hectares, an area which is equal to the size of Rajasthan. For achieving the net zero target, India's cumulative undiscounted additional investment cost would be around $81 trillion or about 35% of incremental GDP by 2050. While the pressure is building upon the developing economies in the G20, including India, Brazil, South Africa, Indonesia, and Turkey, to commit to the net zero target, many of them want developed countries to provide the funds needed for the developing world for the transition to cleaner fuels. And most developed nations haven't given the funds promised years ago.
Rather than trying to turn the tables on each other, countries need to do their bit to arrest global warming. There's no other option. With that, we've come to the end of this show. We'll see you tomorrow morning with more news and analysis. Stay tuned and thank you for watching.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.